All right, we're in our final section for the security and risk management domain, acquisitions and strategy and best practices. When we talk about acquisition strategy, we talked about this subject a little bit earlier. We're talking about acquisitions and mergers and divestitures and spin-offs and so on. But in addition to kind of discussing this idea of acquisitions and strategy, we also talk about supply chain management. How do we manage the supply chain? As a company that might provide services to, consulting services and implementation and design services and other IT-related services, we have to make sure that we're acquiring our equipment, our software, our services from vendors, our cloud services, or any other services we might be providing to our customers from reputable sources. If the supply chain is compromised, there is the potential of introducing, weak or insecure products into our customers' networks or our networks, or services that are otherwise not secure. So we have different types of agreements that we can put into place. We have MOUs, a memorandum of understanding. We have service level agreements and so on. And there is a kind of a standard vetting process to vet the supply chain that we use within our business. We want to make sure that we're not introducing systems that have inherent flaws in them, hardware failure flaws or software failure flaws. So we have to have a supply chain risk management program. Oftentimes, the customers that we work with, especially for working with the federal government, have specific requirements as to where you can purchase equipment and purchase products from. And that supply chain is really just an extension of your organization. And as such, that it needs to be vetted effectively, almost as much as you would be vetted as based on your relationship with the federal government or whomever you're doing business with. All right. So the supply chain includes physical and digital assets. I would say digital assets are probably the more critical ones. If you're purchasing what we call COTS or commercial off-the-shelf applications, you want to make sure that those applications are secure, but and they function appropriately. But we're definitely concerned about custom applications or services or software that we're purchasing from a third-party vendor. The purchase of products or services without security being considered could introduce significant risk to the organization. Again, we talked about that old adage, the security of your enterprise or your customer's enterprise is only as strong as the weakest link. And if that weakest link is some third-party software that you're incorporating into the systems that you've fully vetted, that can be a bit of a problem. So purchase products that have, through the build life cycle, have cybersecurity designed and built in. There are different software development life cycle steps that can be taken. We will certainly talk about those concepts a little bit later on, right? Are we using an agile development process? Are we using a waterfall development process? What kind of input is being utilized to ensure that the software that we're installing is adequately secure? All right. Include baseline cybersecurity requirements as a condition of the contract award for acquisitions, meaning that the standards that you would apply internally to your organization for security need to be applied to your partners as well and your supply chain. You can actually say, one of the conditions of potentially awarding a contract to a third party or a supply chain supplier would be that they have to meet specific requirements, much like you have specific requirements for your relationship with the federal government or whatnot. Make sure you only do business with those organizations that meet that baseline requirement. Address cybersecurity through training and awareness programs. Yes, you can incorporate training and awareness programs with your supply chain vendors. It's not just a matter of dictating what they may have to do internally. There are outreach programs that you can include within your relationship that says, okay, we understand that you guys don't necessarily have a culture in place for training, cybersecurity training and whatnot, but we would like to invite you to participate in our own cybersecurity training and awareness programs so that we, feel comfortable kind of cross-pollinating that knowledge and that providing that knowledge transfer. Develop common cybersecurity definitions for acquisition. This can be done through contract. It can be done through what most would call an MOU or a Memorandum of Understanding, which defines the obligations of parties involved in a relationship, right? It's not quite as binding as an SLA. Service level agreements tend to be more one-sided, and it requires a specific level of service from a vendor. But a Memorandum of Understanding is kind of like, okay, this is what we expect from you in this relationship, and this is what we will also in turn provide to you in this relationship as well. Implement acquisition cyber risk management strategies. In other words, a supply chain with cybersecurity in mind. Require purchases from authorized resellers and trusted sources. In the world of consulting, there are always ways to purchase product, maybe a little bit less expensive. Either it's a refurbished product or what we call gray market product, where it maybe not necessarily be invalid product. It's just not necessarily from a vendor that is vetted by, say for example, Cisco. We can purchase product for our customers, Cisco product for our customers through authorized channels like Ingram Micro and Tech Data and so on, or we can purchase product through unauthorized channels like eBay and Amazon and so on. All right, implement accountability for that program, meaning that we have checks and balances in place to ensure that the program deliverables are being met and we are applying the appropriate amount of security. Okay. Minimum security and service levels. Cloud computing. That's a big component these days. In fact, ISC Squared has their own special cloud security certification. But cloud computing is a supply chain concept because you are purchasing a service from a third party. So that cloud provider would be part of your supply chain. Are you purchasing infrastructure as a service where you get basic computing services like processors and memory and storage and the physical underlying media or transport media? Are you getting a platform as a service where you're basically just getting the operating system, a database? You don't really know what's happening on the physical side, on the hardware side. You're being delivered a platform that you can install an operating system on, that you can install software applications on, or software as a service, right? Where you're basically just getting access to software applications like a database application or an email application. Office 365 is an example of software as a service where you get actually subscription to, Microsoft Office and Exchange and whatnot. Regardless of whatever the as-a-service platform is, and there are many, many other types of as-a-service platforms, but entropy as a service, security as a service. We also have third-party relationships that we can build with MSSP, managed security service providers, CASB, content security brokers, all kinds of relationships that we can build in the cloud space, right? In the internet space. But we need to make sure that we have service level agreements in place. But service level agreements in place really only provide us guaranteed levels of service, or at least contractually obligated guaranteed level of service. And there would be associated penalties if those levels were not provided. But it does not imply that you've done the appropriate assessments, or you've identified that that particular service provider provides the appropriate level of security, that they also have the same culture of cybersecurity awareness that you do, and they're focused on cybersecurity as a principle rather than a secondary consideration. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. It becomes a bit of a challenge, right? Because oftentimes you don't have the ability to audit or vet third-party networks or third-party infrastructures like you would your own internal infrastructure. Oftentimes you kind of have to rely on like a SOC report. We'll talk about SOC reporting a little bit later on, or some sort of claim of cybersecurity awareness and cybersecurity function from that service provider without the ability to go and vet and verify that functionality actually exists. You need to understand the countries who own and operate these third-party provider systems as well. Why would that be important? We have things called data sovereignty rules. Rules for personally identifiable information, rules for providing security or providing confidentiality, integrity, and availability will change from country to country. And as you expand your global reach and you move into different geographical areas, you may be susceptible to additional laws or additional regulations, or even just additional standards that you might not have to adhere to, say if you were just simply operating within the United States or within the confines of the U.S. border, right? So data sovereignty is something that we have to consider in that regard. As I expand more globally, I have to consider what it is that I'm going to be obligated to take care of based on the rules and the regulations in that particular region. A service level agreement or service level requirements document is typically a legally binding document that identifies the expected service level. Now, typically this is going to be related to a concept of, availability and uptime, right? They specifically say availability requirements and availability thresholds. So, we're purchasing a service from a third party, and that service is critical to our operations. So we want to make sure that we have access to that service 99% of the time, or with 5 nines of reliability. And of course, the service level requirements document would also identify fundamentally what services are required to be rendered in order for us to to have the service that we need, right? So we'll have a name of the service, a description of the service, and so on. We'll break down that service kind of functionally and in functional blocks, and what are the performance requirements for handling service interruptions. Things like what kind of response time would I expect to get from the support department? What are the escalation procedures if Tier 1 is not able to assist and they're not able to resolve an issue? How do we escalate to Tier 2, and how do we escalate to Tier 3? If there are predefined windows for maintenance, right? I don't want to buy a service from you if you're doing maintenance every month, and that maintenance window is 4 or 5 hours, and that affects my business drastically. So we need to identify what the potential downtime is for even just kind of maintenance windows and so on. How much notification are we going to get based on those maintenance windows? What is the maximum allowable downtime? That kind of thing. What are the procedures for communication? That's a very, very important concept. If I contact the help desk, how quickly do I expect to talk to somebody, and how are they going to communicate? Do we expect them to dispatch somebody on site, or are they only going to provide remote services or remote support services? What is the lower limit for service? In other words, what is the minimum threshold for service? What is the upper limit for service? What is the maximum level of service that I would expect to receive? Typically, these would be defined as really the terms and conditions of the contract, right? Meaning that, yes, we're going to provide you a 1-hour response time, but that does not mean that we're going to have somebody on site within an hour. We might have a 4-hour window to have somebody on site, or maybe a 24-hour window to have somebody on site. It really depends on, what type of service you're purchasing, and really how you negotiate that particular contract. What are the response times from applications? What are the response times or reaction times for issues? What are the resolution times? And then one thing that's not listed here is then potentially what are the penalties, right? If I don't meet the specific requirements, what are the potential penalties to the organization for not meeting those particular requirements? All right, so this is just an example of some of the questions that you might ask. What are the core business hours for this particular system? What do I need to do to ensure that support levels correlate with this information? And then we have the defined parameters, right? 24/7, 8 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week, etc. What are the preferred time frames for reporting and batch processing? What are the preferred time frames for planned outages to perform general system maintenance, etc., etc. What you decide to put into the SLA, into your service level agreement, is really entirely up to you. It just depends on how in-depth you want that agreement to be, how critical the services are to your organization, and typically the more stringent the agreement, the more likely it is that you're going to have kind of a premium price for that service, or a premium price for that cost, for that level of guarantee. But that's when you have to do your cost benefits analysis, and you have to analyze what that cost is, and how effective that might be. All right. So that does finally wrap up domain number 1. We're going to go ahead and jump in now to domain number 2.